This is the second part of a series explaining every single Kill Team faction, and this part is covering all of the Chaos teams. In case you didn't see the first one, this breakdown will be going over the lore of what each Kill Team faction is, and then telling you how they play. And this video is designed for new players, so the breakdowns are going to be fairly simple where you can understand them, even if you aren't familiar with Warhammer lore. So this video is all about Chaos. So before we dive into the factions, let's go over what exactly is Chaos in Warhammer 40,000. So in 40k, there's another realm called the Immaterium or the Warp. This is basically 40k hell, where the Dark Gods live, where demons come from, and where many believe that souls go when they die. So there are 4 demonic Chaos gods in this realm that try to influence things. And even though they all hate the Imperium man, they don't really like each other either, so it's not like they normally work together. So besides it just being the realm of gods and demons, the warp is very important to everyone as well. Like, it can actually be useful. This is largely because this is where psyker powers come from. So anything involving psyker powers requires a careful connection to the warp. Also, humanity as a whole needs the warp because that's the only way to do faster than light travel. So if the warp wasn't there, faraway planets would have no way to reach other planets for resources for like farmlands or materials. They'd probably just die off. Or if an alien race like the Orcs attacked a planet, without warp travel you'd be stranded with no way to get back up. So that being said, let's go ahead and dive into Chaos Demons that will help explain some of the other kill teams. So this kill team has 4 basic types you can choose from, and each one is representative of one of the Chaos gods. So let's talk about the Chaos gods here. The first one is Khorne, whose big quote everybody knows is blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne. He has a lot of red stereotypical demons who are all about violence. They use a lot of giant melee weapons. Then there's Slaanesh, who is all about emotion being ramped up to 11. It's a lot of lust, pleasure, pain, stuff like that. Just anything with a heightened sense of emotion like whips, drug use, chains, all the fun stuff. So another note about this god is she's the youngest god, only having been born around the year 30,000, while the others are very ancient. Her main demons have a lot of blues and pinks in their colors and are called demonettes. I'll have a picture here so you can see kind of what they look like. Then we have Nurgle, who's all about decay and disease. Nurgle uses a whole host of infections and sicknesses to kill or slow down his enemies. His demons are typically tough and slow, just being an unstoppable force that's spreading decay anywhere they go. In Kill Team he has his Plague Bears, but he uses a lot of different gross little green impel demons in 40k overall. And finally we have Siege. He is the god of change and trickery. He's a weird one to describe because he likes to play games by confusing people and trying to cause general chaos. A lot of his demons don't rely as much on physical strength as the other gods, but they have a lot of mythical psyker powers and a lot of ranged weapons. He even has demons where you'll do something like kill them and they'll split into other smaller demons. So a lot of trickery. As far as gameplay, all of these choices are fairly horde based where you get a lot of models on the board. And they all have something in common with regular 40k where every model has what's called a demon save. So in 40k and Kill Team, if an enemy has a weapon that's armor piercing, it makes your defenses worse. So it makes it harder to avoid damage. But demons just completely ignore armor piercing, and will have the same type of defense against basically any range attack. Typically, all of the demons will just run up and attack. They're heavily melee based. The Bloodletters, which are Khorne, have a better charge and do a lot of reliable melee damage. Demonettes are Slaanesh based, and also have a solid melee profile, but are pretty straightforward. Nurgle has his Plague Bears, which have slower movement but have disgustingly resilient, which is a random chance to just not take damage. And finally, Siege has his Whores, which can use range attacks, but can also split, which means when you kill one, it can split into 2 slightly weaker demons. This uses a lot of your resources, like your command points, but it's pretty solid. So you have a lot of options with demons, and some of their models are visually really interesting. So I know a lot of people love the Chaos God lore, and their brutal up-close fighting style can be really fun. Next up, we are talking about one of the biggest factions in all of 40k lore, and these are the Chaos Space Marines, also known as Heretic Astartes or Traitor Space Marines. So in the last part of this series, I said at one point there was a giant civil war called the Horus Heresy that happened in 40k. where the Imperium of Man was split in half. Well, this wasn't necessarily just because some of the Emperor's sons were jealous and wanted to gain power. And it wasn't just some kind of policy disagreement on how to rule. The reason some of these sons went traitor and brought their Space Marines with them were that they were actually influenced by the Chaos Gods we talked about earlier. So a caveat to this is each son did have their own story and their own motivation, so it wasn't like they were just perfectly happy and then got corrupted. To various degrees, Chaos just helped push them over the edge or trick them somehow. And some of their reasons were pretty understandable. Well, understandable as far as reasons to work with Gods of Chaos. Also, if you wanted to get hyped up on this whole event and get motivated to go read the books, go watch the trailer for the Horus Heresy game. I'll have the visuals and the B-roll here, but it's so much better with the voice lines. So that whole event, that whole civil war called the Horus Heresy, is probably the biggest single event in 40k lore, and that's why so many people love the Chaos Space Marines. So as far as visual models, the models really are just normal Space Marines under the influence of Chaos. So since each of the chapters of Space Marines had some unique feature, and many of them were affected by a different one of the Chaos Gods, they all change in different ways. A lot of them just add spikes and skulls to their armor, but some of the changes were pretty severe. If you like the idea of evil Space Marines, look through some of the different backstories in the different chapters before you get started, so you can make sure to paint up your models to match your favorite chapter. A few of them do have unique models and rules, but we'll get into them a little bit later. So in-game, the Traitor Space Marines play fairly similarly to regular Space Marines, but you only have one type of Marine to choose from. You get 6 of them, so they're more on the elite side, and like regular Space Marines, they're a jack-of-all-trade, master-of-none type team. Solid in melee, solid in range, solid ploys, not anything they're really horrible at. The thing that does make them stand out from their loyalist counterparts is you can use Chaos Cultists on their team. These are humans who serve under them. You can't run a full team of cultists, so if you want to run them, you'll have 3 Space Marines and 8 cultists. The cultists are pretty weak on their own though, but you can use them just as numbers to hold objectives or do different things on the board. And they have an ability where you can place one farther up on the board than normal during deployment, so you might even be able to get a cheeky free point just because of that ploy. A final warning here is this team is pretty weak overall. You'll normally be an underdog in your matches. This video isn't a tier list or anything, I just don't see this team ever being really competitive. But if you like Chaos Space Marines, there is another team called the Legionaries that will be an awesome choice. So lore-wise, Legionaries are basically the same as the other Chaos Space Marine team. You still get 6 models, just the biggest difference here is each model can be a specialist and have different abilities based on which of the gods you follow. This is just the newer, updated Chaos Space Marine team. So your models can follow any of the 4 main Chaos gods or Chaos Undivided, meaning they're not loyal to one, it's just Chaos in general. There are some limits, like you can't have Khorne and Slaanesh on the same team together, and same with Siege and Nurgle. This will give each model a different buff, as well as a different ploy you can use based on what you decide. Khorne is all about charging and melee, Slaanesh is melee and movement, Nurgle is being tanky, Siege is mostly range attacks, and Undivided is a damage increase at close range. With your models, you'll have your standard Marines and your Gunner option, but you also have some other cool ones, like a guy with 2 claws that can let a demon take control for a massive buff, but the inability to do anything for missions. And you have a Psyker here, so you can do stuff like a Fire Blast, or drain life energy away from the enemy to give it to your other models. There's others, but we won't go over all of them here. So if you already have a normal Chaos Space Marine team or want to buy that set, this team does have a Gunner, a Heavy Gunner, and an Icon Bearer. So you can run your normal Chaos Space Marines as the specialty team to be able to pick your Chaos Gods and get those buffs. The first team is simpler, so it might be a good idea to practice with them if you don't know the core mechanics of Kill Team. But once you learn it, you can use this team, add some complexity, and have a more interesting, powerful team. So if you like Chaos and you want a more elite team, this is a great way to play. Next up we have the Warpcoven. In 40k, the chapter this is based off of is called Thousand Suns, so I'll probably just be referring to this as the Thousand Suns for the rest of the video. So their chapter was one that went to Chaos because they were tricked by Siege. There's a whole meme and debate about if their Primarch, who was named Magus, actually did anything wrong or if he was completely tricked. He was trying to help the Emperor, but used his psychic powers, which actually let Chaos have a huge advantage. Then he continued to get tricked and eventually ended up joining Chaos. When this happened, all of his Marines basically became living dust inside of their armor, so he wasn't intentionally trying to betray the Emperor when he did. So if you hear the meme about Magnus did nothing wrong, that's kind of the simple story. I'm normally not really into talking about meme stuff overall, but if you play this team, there's no way you don't hear that at least a couple times. The big thing this team is famous for is their heavy use of Psyker powers. This is probably the most Psyker heavy team in 40k and Kill Team. Technically, the Grey Knights have more Psykers on their team, but they only have buffs. With Thousand Suns, you can actually be launching your psychic powers at people. So you can use deadly bolts, you can cause explosions, and you can cast fire down from the sky. So it's a much more dramatic use of Psyker powers. There are some differences. Since you do have dust bodies instead of physical bodies, you have a limit to your movement, and you have some defensive buffs as well. But outside of those and your Psyker powers, you're pretty much standard Space Marines. This team does have another model option called Zangors, which are like their servants. You get more of them in a Kill Team, but they're definitely not as tough or strong as their Space Marines. They are like these half-man, half-goat things that are mostly melee-based. Technically, they can have a pistol, but it's not very good. They have some abilities that can buff all other Zangors, and you can mix and match them, so it's not all one or the other. Running a few of them can be pretty helpful, just so you have more bodies to help take objectives. So if you like a heavily Psyker-based team that's good on offense, this is probably the best team you can run. Next up, we have another chapter-specific kill team, and this is the Death Guard. This is a chapter that was corrupted by Nurgle, so very slow but very, very tanky. The Death Guard Marines are called Plague Marines, and they're Space Marines that are almost dead, decaying inside of their armor. They're afflicted with all kinds of diseases and are just rotting chunks of flesh, but they also can't feel pain. So while they're walking around spreading these illnesses, even if you blow off a limb or shoot them, they probably won't stop. They play pretty similar to how you think they'd play. They have roughly 30% slower movement than other Space Marines, and they have an ability where if they get hit, you have a chance to just completely ignore it. And this is called Disgustingly Resilient. Besides that, they also have Contagion, which is where everything around you moves slower and is less effective in combat. They're just so hard to get rid of, and even though they're defensively focused, they still do pretty good damage in range and melee. So besides the Plague Marines, you can also use Posswalkers, which are their servants, which are also basically rotting people. If you use them, you'll have 3 Plague Marines and 8 Posswalkers, so you get a lot of models. These Posswalkers only have melee weapons, and they also move slower than most models. So these models are also mindless, which means that they're worse at doing mission actions, so they are useful, but they don't do anything in a hurry. So if you like that slow-moving, unkillable force of evil Marines, Death Guard is the team for you. Next up, we have the Blooded Kill Team. This team is basically a group of Imperial Guard soldiers who were tired of the horrible conditions of the Imperial Guard and decided to stop serving the Emperor. Instead, they decided to serve the Chaos Gods and be done getting corrupted by them. So these Traitor Guardsmen are still human, but they can get blessings and powers from Chaos who are trying to prove themselves. So they fight in a really savage way, and will do things just to prove themselves to the Chaos Gods. Lore-wise, there's not a lot else to say, besides that they're Imperial Guard soldiers who turn traitor, so let's dive into the team itself. Like the standard Imperial Guard, these Traitor Guardsmen aren't very tough on their own, but you get a lot of them. And they have a lot of individual types of models. Some of them are like a sniper model, a shield and shotgun combo type guy. You have models that can use chemicals to buff others, and probably the most striking model on the team is the Traitor Ogryn. So Ogrins are abhumans, who are from a high-gravity planet, and because of this they developed huge bodies and are much stronger than a normal human, but they're not very intelligent at all. Here we get an Ogryn that has turned to Chaos, combining the Ogryn with the chemical buffs from your other operative, and it's a very powerful model. And you can have 2 of them on your team. So the main mechanic of this team are your blooded tokens. Think of these tokens as having favor with the Chaos Gods. So you earn them throughout the game, and then you can spend them to buff your models. You get some for free, but you mostly will earn them by killing. And then when you use them, you can automatically successfully attack, and if you have enough of these activated, you can even get automatic critical hits. The main playstyle of this team is very kill focused. They even have a secondary mission called Bloodbath, where you get victory points for killing half of your enemy's team, and then you get another point if you kill 3/4 of them. While there can be a lot to track between managing blooded tokens and all the special abilities, the main objective is pretty simple. Kill as many of your enemy as you can. So if you want something Chaos themed but don't want Space Marines, I think this is the coolest Chaos team personally. So the final team I want to talk about isn't actually released yet, but it's the Gellerpox Infected. So this team and the Star Striders will be returning Kill Team pretty soon. I think they're coming out for pre-order literally on the day I'm recording this. So they were both teams from the last edition of Kill Team. We didn't talk about the Rogue Traitors and the Star Striders in the last episode because that team hadn't been announced, but you have to understand them to understand the Gellerpox Infected, so let's talk about them for a second here. The Rogue Traitors are basically freelancers from the Imperium to go out and explore outside of the Imperium border. They're normally heavily armored and hire other mercenaries to help them out, so it's a crew of highly skilled individuals. Well, one of these groups were called the Star Striders, and they'll be a playable faction soon in Kill Team as well. We don't know exactly what they'll do, but they'll have a ton of buffs to help each other out, and I think they'll be mostly ranged. That and they'll have a lot of synergy buffing type of mechanics. So what the Gellerpox Infected team is, they're basically rogue traitors who got infected by Nurgle and became more Nurgleized. So they have your standard Nurgle grossness, and they have a nice mix of models, including some large tanky infected guys, and some smaller grunt style minis as well. For this team and the Star Striders, you can look at their models online. We just don't have the actual rules out yet. So we know they'll have disgustingly resilient, same as Death Guard, and I think they'll have a similar playstyle where they're slow but very, very tanky. They also have a unique mechanic that will let them mess up ranged weapons and make them malfunction when one of your models are nearby. So like I said, I think the models are on pre-order as I'm recording this video, but the editing time on these videos is kind of long for me, so we might have their full rules when I release this, so if we do, that's kind of what happened there. So if you like the Nurgle-based teams but don't actually want to play the Daemons or Death Guard, this is another great option. I have a feeling they'll be decently strong. Alright, so that's every Chaos team we currently have. I'll probably do a homebrew video between now and the next part of this video series, but this final part will be my personal favorite, which are Xenos. So Xenos has my 2 favorite kill teams, so I'm pretty excited to do that one. Don't forget to like this video, and thank you for watching.